Welcome to today's deep dive. We are tackling a pretty massive topic today from our stack of clinical study guides, behavioral textbooks, and mock exams.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is. We're looking at BCBA Foundation C6, which covers discontinuous measurement procedures, specifically, interval recording and time sampling.
Right, right.
And our mission today is pretty straightforward. Whether you are cramming for your BCBA exam, or maybe you're a parent navigating the therapy world.
Or just someone curious about human behavior.
Exactly. Just wanting to understand how clinicians actually measure behavior in a chaotic, real-world setting. We're going to guide you through all of this.
It's such a critical foundation for anyone in the field, really.
Because we're going to unpack how the specific ways scientists measure reality actually, distort the data they collect.
Yeah, and more importantly, how you can use those exact distortions to your advantage. Knowing how to manipulate these tools is like the difference between capturing a true picture of behavior and creating a completely false narrative.
Right. Because usually when we think about taking measurements, whether you're, I don't know, weighing flour for a cake or tracking your daily steps, we just assume the tools are capturing reality.
Yeah, we treat it like engineering.
Exactly. You step on a bathroom scale, you see a number, and you just accept it. The measurement is the reality.
We are definitely conditioned to think of data as purely objective. Like, we like things to be binary, perfectly categorized, and visible.
But the moment you step into the world of applied behavior analysis,
That is messy.
so messy, especially when you're trying to measure human behavior in a busy classroom or like a bustling clinic, that perfectly calibrated bathroom scale is essentially broken.
Yeah, you're stepping into a measurement landscape that is incredibly murky.
Yep.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters, really.
Right.
Because measuring behavior perfectly with zero margin of error is functionally impossible. Unless, you're willing and able to stare at someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Without ever blinking or looking away, which obviously no teacher, parent, or therapist can actually do.
Of course not.
So we have to start with a reality check about why we even need discontinuous measurement in the first place. The textbooks point to continuous measurement as the absolute gold standard.
Right. Event recording.
Yeah, tracking every single instance or every single second a behavior happens.
That is the ideal scenario. I mean, if a child hits their desk, you count it. 1, 2, 3. If they have a tantrum, you start a stopwatch the exact second the crying begins.
And stop at the exact second it ends.
Exactly. You capture the total duration, the exact frequency. It leaves absolutely nothing out.
But practically speaking, that is a total fantasy for a busy teacher managing a room full of 30 kids.
Oh, yeah.
Or a therapist running a complex group social skills session.
Yeah.
You can't just stand in the corner holding a clipboard and a stopwatch all day long.
Right, because you have to actually interact and teach and manage the environment. You simply do not have the operational bandwidth. And that is exactly why the field relies on discontinuous measurement. Instead of trying to track everything that happens, we chop a larger block of time into smaller, manageable intervals.
Okay.
And we just take samples.
Yeah.
We only record data during those specific predefined windows.
It's exactly like security footage. Like, continuous measurement is sitting in a control room watching the live 24/7 video feed.
Right, you see everything.
You see every single leaf blowing across the screen, every bird landing on the fence. But discontinuous measurement is like setting up a motion sensor camera that only snaps a photo every 5 minutes.
That's a great analogy.
You get the general gist of what happened out there, but you completely miss all the spaces and activity that occurred in between the photos.
Yeah, and that highlights the exact limitation we face, You are only capturing snapshots.
Right.
And because you're only taking snapshots, we run into this foundational concept from our sources called measurement artifacts.
Measurement artifact. Okay.
Yeah. Whenever we use discontinuous measurement, our data is going to contain illusions.
By illusions, you mean the data is fundamentally misrepresenting reality.
Exactly.
Like, it might look like a behavior happened way more often or way less often than it actually did, purely because of the specific ruler we decided to use to measure it.
Yes. The tool creates a distortion. The data we are looking at is an artifact of the measurement tool itself, rather than a perfect reflection of the client's behavior.
Wow. Okay, so the tool itself is basically lying to us.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But the key to being a proficient behavior analyst, or even just an informed consumer of this data, isn't trying to magically avoid these artifacts.
That's just, you can't, right?
Right. If you were taking samples instead of continuous recording, Avoiding artifacts is mathematically impossible.
So what do you do?
The real genius is in using the correct tool so that the specific artifact works for you rather than against you. You have to know the inherent biases of your tools.
Okay, so knowing that our tools are going to distort reality, let's look at the first one from our stack. It's called partial interval recording, or PIR.
Yes, PIR.
And it is notorious for being the overestimator.
Oh, it's the classic overestimator by design. Here's the setup for partial interval recording. You take an observation period, let's say a 1-hour class,
Okay.
and you divide it into equal intervals. For this example, we will use 1-minute intervals.
Got it.
The rule for PIR is that if the target behavior happens at any point during that interval, even for a single second, the entire interval gets a check mark for occurrence.
Okay, let's ground this in a real classroom scenario from the source material. Imagine a first grader. Let's call him Nolan.
Okay, Nolan.
Nolan frequently chews on his shirt collar for comfort, and he's doing it so much that he's ruining his clothes, and he's developed this really painful rash around his mouth.
Right.
So a BCBA comes into the classroom to figure out exactly how often this is happening, and they use partial interval recording with 61-minute intervals to get a baseline.
So the observer is watching Nolan for a full hour, tracking his behavior minute by minute.
Yeah, but let's look at how this distorts the reality of Nolan's day. Let's say we are in minute 14. Nolan puts his shirt in his mouth for exactly 3 seconds, realizes he shouldn't be doing it, and stops.
Okay.
Because of the rules of partial interval recording, that single 3-second chew means the entire minute gets marked as an occurrence.
It does. A check mark goes in the box for minute 14.
Wait, okay, but what if, in minute 15, Nolan spaces out and chews his shirt for 59 seconds straight?
That also just gets a single check mark.
So on the final data sheet, a 3-second chew and a 59-second chew look absolutely identical.
They look exactly the same.
Doesn't that warp the data horribly? I mean, it grossly overestimates how much he is actually engaging in the behavior.
It drastically warps the data. It makes it look like he's chewing his shirt constantly when he might just be taking quick little bites throughout the hour.
That's wild.
But remember our goal, right? We want the artifact to work for our specific clinical purpose.
Which means we actively want to overestimate Nolan's shirt chewing.
Exactly. We use this tool specifically for behaviors we want to decrease, like a self-injurious behavior or a disruption.
Okay, I see.
By overestimating the behavior right out of the gate, we're establishing a highly conservative, worst-case scenario baseline.
It's like playing a video game on hard mode.
Yeah.
If you can beat the boss when the game is actively working against you, you know for sure you have mastered the level.
That's a great way to put it.
So if we implement a treatment for Nolan, like giving him a safe chew tube instead of his shirt, and we actually manage to make that inflated, over-exaggerated data line drop on our graph.
We can be absolutely certain that the intervention is working, the behavior is genuinely decreasing, even against a tool that is trying to artificially prop the numbers up. We have indisputable proof of clinical success.
Wow, okay. That is a really clever strategy.
It is. And for anyone listening who is prepping for their BCBA exam, here is a critical, non-negotiable rule.
Exam tip, write this down.
Never use partial interval recording for a behavior you want to increase.
Because the artifact will work against you in the worst possible way, right? Like if you want to increase independent reading time and you use partial interval recording, a student could open their book, read for exactly 1 second, and then spend the remaining 59 seconds of the interval staring out the window, and your data sheet gives them a check mark.
Right. At the end of the hour, your data might falsely claim this student was reading 100% of the time.
When in reality, they read for 60 seconds total.
And you would be celebrating a massive success that doesn't actually exist. The data would completely betray the reality of the student's progress.
Which is why choosing the right measurement tool is such a profound professional responsibility.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if partial interval recording cheats in favor of the behavior by overestimating, what do we use when we want to be incredibly strict?
We flip to the opposite tool.
Right, like what if we want to track something we want to increase, like staying on task, independent play, or reading?
That is whole interval recording, or WIR. And just as PIR is the overestimator, whole interval recording is the notorious underestimator.
The underestimator. Okay, so the mechanics start out the same, right? You divide the observation period into equal intervals.
Yes, but to get a check mark with whole interval recording, the behavior must occur for the entire uninterrupted duration of the interval.
It is an all-or-nothing game.
Completely. If the behavior drops off for even a fraction of a second, the interval does not count. It gets a 0.
That makes me think of a really harsh hourly wage job.
Oh, how so?
Imagine you get hired for a job where your boss only pays you if you work the full continuous 60 minutes of the hour.
Okay.
If you work incredibly hard for 59 minutes, but you clock out 1 minute early to grab a drink of water, your boss gives you $0 for that entire hour.
Wow. Yeah.
All your effort is essentially erased on the spreadsheet.
That highlights the strictness perfectly. Let's look at a clinical scenario from the sources to see how this plays out.
Okay.
Imagine a preschooler named Junior, who really struggles during free choice time. Instead of engaging with the toys or activities, he wanders from station to station, knocking things over and bothering the other kids.
Typical preschool stuff, yeah.
Right. His teacher wants to increase his engagement with the classroom materials. So the observer uses whole interval recording.
Which means Junior only gets credit for an interval if he is actively playing with an activity for the entire duration of that interval.
Exactly. And because that requirement is so punishingly strict, whole interval recording acts as a rough but deliberately underestimated measure of duration.
Let's walk through the math on another scenario just to really expose how intense this underestimation can get.
Let's do the math. Consider a scenario involving a boy named Sam who engages in a behavior called spinning. The clinician wants to increase Sam's functional play and decrease the spinning, but they need to measure the spinning first. They use whole interval recording across 25 intervals,
Got it.
and each interval is exactly 30 seconds long. At the end of the session, the data shows Sam was spinning for 64% of those intervals.
Okay, let's break that down. 64% of 25 total intervals. That means he got a check mark for 16 intervals.
Correct. And since each interval was 30 seconds long, 16 intervals multiplied by 30 seconds gives us 480 seconds.
Divide that by 60, then we get 8 minutes.
Exactly. But we have to look closely at what that 8 minutes actually represents in the real world.
Well, it means he spun for at least 8 minutes total, because to earn that check mark, he had to be spinning for the entire 30 seconds of those 16 intervals.
Right.
But the reality is he was almost certainly spinning during the other 9 intervals too, just not for the full 30 seconds.
Yep. He might have spun for 29 seconds, stopped to catch his breath for 1 second.
And that entire interval got marked as a 0.
Exactly. The artifact here is severe underestimation. Now, consider the psychological toll this takes on a parent, a teacher, or a new therapist.
Oh, I can imagine.
Imagine you are working with Sam. You implement a great intervention, and you are watching him in the room. You see him improving. You see him spinning less and playing more.
Yeah.
But because he spun for 28 seconds in an interval instead of 30, the datasheet still says 0.
Ugh, that's
The
brutal.
spreadsheet says he is failing even when your eyes tell you he is making progress. It can be incredibly frustrating to see real-world improvement that the data refuses to acknowledge because of the strict criteria of whole interval recording.
It demands a lot of resilience from the clinician to trust the process. Because again, it's hard mode, just in the opposite direction.
Right. It is a highly conservative estimate.
So if we implement a treatment to increase a desired behavior and we actually see our whole interval data going up, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the behavior is genuinely increasing.
We do.
Because the tool is actively trying to suppress the score, so any upward movement is hard-fought and undeniably real.
Which brings up a fundamental rule for anyone using these systems in practice. Exam tip number 2. Shorter intervals make your discontinuous data much more accurate.
Okay, so smaller is better.
Yes. Whether you are using partial or whole interval recording, a 5-second interval is going to give you a much truer picture of reality than a 1-minute interval.
Because as the interval gets shorter and closer to 0, it begins to mimic continuous measurement.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if the interval is only 5 seconds long, there is simply less room for the artifact to hide. A kid can't fake reading for 59 seconds if the interval is over in 5.
True.
But this brings me to a major practical issue with both partial and whole interval recording.
The observation requirements.
Yes, exactly. Both of these tools require the observer to stare at the client constantly. For partial interval, you have to watch like a hawk to see if the behavior happens even once. For whole interval, you have to watch the entire time to make absolutely sure they don't stop. But What if the observer is a teacher who actually has to stand at the whiteboard and teach a math lesson?
Or a parent who is trying to cook dinner for 3 other kids.
Right. They cannot just stare unblinking at one child for an hour.
And that is precisely why the field developed the third major tool from our sources, momentary time sampling, or MTS.
MTS. Okay.
This is the ultimate measurement system for the busy observer who has to multitask.
The snapshot method.
Yes. With momentary time sampling, the observer sets a recurring timer. Let's say every 2 minutes. The teacher goes about teaching her math lesson, writing on the board, answering questions.
Doing her job.
Right. And when the timer beeps, she looks up at the specific student. Is the target behavior happening right at that exact millisecond? Yes or no?
Wow. Okay.
She marks her data sheet based on that single glance and then goes right back to teaching.
So imagine a 6th grader named Tate who frequently interrupts during class by shouting out answers.
Okay,
His teacher is willing to take baseline data to help the BCBA, but she is actively managing 30 other kids. So she uses momentary time sampling.
Yeah.
Every 2 minutes, the timer goes off and she glances at Tate. If he happens to be shouting out right at that exact moment, he gets a check mark. If he is quiet when she looks, he gets a 0.
It is incredibly practical and realistic for a classroom environment. It frees the observer to actually do their primary job.
Yeah.
But you have to understand the severe vulnerability of this specific tool.
Well, the vulnerability is massive. If Tate is constantly interrupting throughout the lesson, but he finishes shouting 5 seconds before the timer goes off, and he happens to be quietly taking a breath right at the exact millisecond the teacher looks up, she marks a 0.
Exact.
The behavior completely falls through the cracks.
You've isolated the fatal flaw of momentary time sampling. Because you are only looking at the exact moment the timer sounds, MPS is a terrible, invalid tool for short-duration, discrete behaviors. If the behavior you are tracking is a quick hit, a spit, or a one-word shout, you are going to miss it almost every single time.
And your data will falsely tell you the behavior isn't happening, simply because your timing didn't perfectly align with the split-second event.
Exactly.
It's like rain is a continuous state, so checking the window every 2 minutes works perfectly. You'll know if it's raining.
A good analogy.
But lightning is a discrete, fleeting event. If you use momentary time sampling to track lightning, your data will tell you the storm never even happened because the odds of looking out the window at the exact millisecond of a flash are basically 0.
That captures the limitation perfectly. Therefore, the clinical rule is that momentary time sampling is only valid for measuring continuous, longer-lasting states.
Okay, like what?
Behaviors like being on task, sitting in seat, or engaging in cooperative play. If a student is generally on task reading a book, the odds are very high that when the timer goes off and you look up randomly, you will catch them in the act of reading.
Okay, so it's designed to measure ongoing states, not fleeting events. Now, there is a fascinating variation of momentary time sampling from our reading that expands this concept to a whole room. It's an acronym, play check.
Yes.
TLACHECK, which stands for plan activity check.
Play check is simply momentary time sampling applied to a group instead of an individual. It is widely used in classroom management.
Let's dig into how a teacher actually executes a play check in real time. Let's say a teacher has 20 students. The timer goes off every 5 minutes.
Okay.
The teacher stops, looks up, and does a quick scan of the room from left to right. First, they count the total number of students present. Let's say all 20 are there.
Yep.
Then, they quickly count how many of those students are actively engaged in the assigned task at that exact moment. Let's say 15 students are writing in their journals.
Okay.
The teacher divides 15 by 20 and records that the class was 75% on task for that interval.
It gives the teacher a rapid, data-driven snapshot of the entire group's engagement level.
But the measurement artifacts here are wild when you think about the individual students.
Oh, they definitely are.
Like, a kid could be throwing paper airplanes and talking to his neighbor for 4 minutes and 59 seconds, but he hears the teacher's timer beep, immediately picks up his pencil, and gets counted as on task during the scan.
Yep, happens all the time.
Meanwhile, another kid could be working diligently for 5 straight minutes, but happens to drop her pencil and bend down to pick it up exactly when the teacher scans past her desk, and she gets counted as off task.
Which is exactly why Play Check is a macro-level tool. It gives you broad strokes of group dynamics, a barometer of the room's general climate.
Right.
It is not a microscope for individual behavior, because as you pointed out, the artifacts on the individual level can be really significant.
Man, we have covered a massive amount of ground regarding how we measure reality and how those measurements distort it. Let's do a rapid-fire recap to lock this in, especially for anyone listening who is gearing up for an exam.
Let's run through it.
Okay, if you are tracking a behavior you want to decrease, like hitting, screaming, or shirt chewing, and you cannot measure it continuously, what is the best tool?
Partial interval recording. It deliberately overestimates the behavior, giving you a conservative, worst-case baseline to work from.
Love it. Okay, if you are tracking a behavior you want to increase, like independent reading, playing cooperatively, or staying on task, what is your tool?
Whole interval recording. It deliberately underestimates the behavior, ensuring that if your data shows improvement, it is a genuine, undeniable improvement.
Right. And if you are a busy teacher or a multitasking parent who cannot constantly stare at the client, and the behavior you are tracking is a continuous state, like being on task.
Momentary time sampling. Or play a check for a group. Just remember never to use it for quick, discrete behaviors, or you will completely miss the lightning strike.
Yes, the lightning strikes, exactly. So bringing this all together, why does the distinction between these tools matter so much in the real world?
It matters because making crucial, accurate clinical decisions about a human being's life relies entirely on this data. We use these numbers to decide if a behavioral intervention is actually working.
Yeah.
If a clinician uses the wrong measurement tool, the data lies to them, and the consequences fall entirely on the client.
Like, if your data falsely says a child is still having high rates of aggressive meltdowns because you used a tool that artificially overestimates the behavior, that child might be kept in a highly restrictive therapy environment far longer than necessary.
Exactly. Alternatively, if your data falsely says a client has mastered a critical life skill because you used the time sampling tool that missed all of their quick errors.
They lose out on an intervention they desperately need to succeed.
Right. The trajectory of their treatment is altered, all because the ruler we used gave us an artifact instead of the truth.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought to chew on today for you guys. We have spent this entire deep dive looking at how all discontinuous measurement creates artifacts, how the very tools we use to measure reality actually distort it.
The observer effect is always present when we sample data.
Right, so it makes you wonder if our highly controlled clinical tools do this, how much of the so-called objective data we see in our everyday lives is doing the exact same thing.
Oh, it's a great point.
Think about the statistical data you see on the evening news, the health apps tracking your sleep cycles, or the performance metrics your boss uses to evaluate you at the workplace.
Yeah.
How much of that hard data is actually just an illusion, an artifact created by the specific ruler someone else decided to use?
It is a sobering thought. We tend to trust numbers implicitly without ever questioning the specific intervals or the snapshots that generated them.
Exactly. Just like that security camera that only snaps a photo every 5 minutes. You might look at the pictures and think you know exactly what happened in the yard, but you only know what the camera was programmed to let you see.
And the spaces in between the photos. That is where reality actually lives.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our coverage of BCBA Foundation C6. We hope this helps you crush your exams or just look at the data in your own life a little different.
Yeah, questioning the ruler.
Join us next time for our deep dive into C7, where we tackle measuring efficiency in behavior analysis, things like trials to criterion and how we figure out the fastest path to learning. Until then, see you next time.